It's a freezing cold night in North London. A homeless man is scouring the streets for something to eat. In his desperation, he searches through a bin outside a block of council flats. What he finds horrifies him. When the police arrive, they discover a black rubbish bag containing human parts. The gruesome crime scene poses many questions. How long have these dismembered limbs been in the bin? Do they belong to the same person or more than one victim? If they don't, could there be a serial killer on the loose? The police need to catch the killer before they strike again. Catching a killer requires conclusive forensic evidence. From clues at the scene of the crime to minute examination in the forensics lab, from the cold reality of the pathologist's table to DNA sampling, digital analysis, each piece of killer evidence brings the murderer closer to justice. It's the 30th of December 2002 and the early hours of the morning in Camden, North London. Police have been called in to investigate possible human remains dumped in a rubbish bin. It's the start of what will be a complex forensic trail. One of the first on the scene was Detective Inspector Brian Hook, who'd go on to lead the investigation. By the time he arrives, the area has been cordoned off by the first responders.
Our job was to get there as quickly as possible and to take control of the scene, not to actually investigate, but actually just to take control of that scene, that golden hour, that part of the initial investigation that is all important. Because if it goes wrong at the start, it stays wrong and it's really difficult to get back on track. The person that had found them was absolutely correct. They were two human severed limbs.
Forensics are soon on site. It's clear that a murder has taken place, and the body parts are the first piece of evidence in the investigation. But there's a mystery to be solved.
Where is the crime scene? Because it's fairly obvious just from initial looking, that is not where this crime has taken place. Where could there be other evidence? We have resources on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And it was fairly easy for me to call a specialist search team.
Police begin a fingertip search of the area.
They have this mindset that I don't care how small it is, I don't care what we're looking for, trust me, Sarge, I'll find it for you. And they do. They literally leave no stone unturned. Fairly quickly, within a matter of an hour or so, another package was found that is the same type of bin liner that the first set of severed limbs were found in. And unfortunately, the officer that had found it was absolutely correct. It contained further human remains.
In the first bag, police had found 2 legs. They suspect they have now found another body part. But until the bags are forensically processed at the pathology lab, they won't know how many victims they're dealing with.
The strategy in this case was to not examine the contents of the bin bags actually at the scene, because clearly there's the potential for all sorts of contamination there. They've already been dumped. Nobody knows what process they've gone through. So the plan was to take those bin bags away and then open them in a more sterile environment to see what was there, rather than risk losing something by examining them at the scene itself. Any suggestion of contamination might affect the success of a prosecution and influence the investigation.
To find another set of body parts in another body bag, well, it's fair to assume that they're connected, but assumptions, that's circumstantial. It's not evidence. To move it to certitude, something you can use in court, something you need to convict, you need forensics.
Police believe the severed limbs are female, but they're no closer to discovering their identities. They hope DNA sampling will provide the answers.
DNA profiling was probably the biggest breakthrough in a method of identification for forensic investigation since the fingerprint database was set up in 1901.
Anyone charged with a crime today has a mouth swab taken. This gives police a DNA sample which is logged on the National DNA Database.
The only problem with that is if the person has not come into the criminal justice system and is not on the National DNA Database, their DNA profile will come back as no trace and you are no further forward. You can't rely on that. You have to look at every other possible method of identification.
These days, police often turn to CCTV cameras to help identify suspects around a crime scene. Back in 2002, those cameras weren't so common. But Camden Council were already using CCTV to monitor some of their larger rubbish bins.
CCTV, London Borough control rooms are open 24 hours a day and they can get potentially crucial footage put aside so that it can be collected and start to be viewed as a matter of some urgency.
Observing CCTV evidence is very complex. It's so much more difficult than the public assumes. You need at least two people, to be honest. Artificial intelligence will probably take over much of the task, but for the moment, it is an activity fraught with difficulty and requires absolute precision and professionalism.
Police spend hours trawling through all the CCTV footage in the area. Eventually, they spot a man dumping black bin liners in the same communal bins where the body parts were found. They have their third piece of crucial evidence.
Well, the CCTV speaks for itself. The offender's on foot, so clearly he's not travelling too far with bin bags. Let's face it, he's not going to be carrying body parts across London on the tube. Like he doesn't have a car, so it sets the police on a pretty predictable trail of looking for suspects within the geographic proximity of where those body parts were dumped.
The location of the bin provides police with their first lead on a possible suspect. 11 months previously, in January 2002, police were called to a nearby block of flats. One of the residents had made an allegation of criminal damage against their neighbour.
They had had battery acid poured through their letterbox as a result of a fairly long-standing dispute with the occupants. Officers from the local police station had gone round there to speak to the occupant of that flat. They questioned him in relation to the criminal damage, and in doing so, he was searched. And in the pocket of his coat was found a key, and the key fitted the bedroom door. The bedroom door is opened, and the officers were greeted with the sight of a female, Sally Rose White, on the bed, naked and deceased. The occupant of that flat was a male. His name is Anthony Hardy. Mr. Hardy was then arrested on suspicion of murder. The victim obviously undergoes a post-mortem. A post-mortem is a scientific examination by a pathologist, and it's their job to find the cause of death of that person. The pathologist comes to the conclusion the person died of natural causes. The only physical injury that that person had was a small cut to the back of her head, and that was not instrumental in any way, shape or form in the cause of death, which was a heart attack. As a result of that, Mr. Hardy, the occupant of the flat, could not be charged in relation to the death of that person.
Hardy may have escaped prosecution, but while in custody, police ask for his mental health to be assessed. This leads to him being sectioned and detained in a secure hospital for treatment.
The vast majority of people that suffer from mental illnesses like bipolar affective disorder are not dangerous. But for a small proportion, if they have these violent tendencies, then when they get into a manic state, it can cause them to be quite speeded up, quite disinhibited in their actions and their thoughts, and unable to consider the consequences of their actions.
10 months later, and just a month before the body parts are found, Hardy is discharged from the secure hospital. But he's now on the police radar. On close examination of the CCTV material, police recognize the man as Anthony Hardy. They've never been certain he had anything to do with Sally White's death, but their suspicions are immediately raised. Surely the fact that Hardy is dumping bin bags in the same bins where the body parts were found is just too much of a coincidence.
A decision is made by the senior investigating officer that officers will go to the door of Mr. Hardy's flat and use the excuse of house-to-house inquiries. They go to the flat and the door is actually open. Directly in front of them is the bedroom door where a year earlier Sally White had been found dead. At the bottom of that door is a rolled up set of sweatpants that are soaked in water. It's been put there to try and keep the odour from spreading throughout the flat. It's not working, and it's fairly obvious that they're going to possibly find human remains behind that door.
With the unmistakable odour of rotting flesh filling the flat, police believe they may have located the home of the murderer. But the front door is wide open and Hardy is nowhere to be found. Has the heightened police presence in the area spooked him? Police put out a call for Hardy's arrest, but they're still trying to find out the identity of the two women whose remains they found dumped in bin bags and who they believe could be victims of a serial killer. While they wait for the results of the DNA analysis to find out who they are, police start the grim task of searching Hardy's flat.
Mr. Hardy's flat is bizarre and strange. The walls and the floors have paintings on them of footmarks and strange characters. One of the other things that's fairly noticeable is a bank of 3 televisions in front of the sofa and 3 video recording machines. A huge amount, hundreds of video cassettes are there. There are pornographic magazines, there are contact magazines, a whole array of things. It transpires that what Mr. Hardy used to do was sit there with friends and they would literally binge watch pornographic films.
I do wonder whether Hardy became so desensitized to watching such a large amount of pornography that it's almost like his tolerance increased, so he needed to one-up the deprived nature of what he was seeing, which eventually converted into actions just for his own sexual gratification.
And the officers enter the bedroom and they find on the floor by the bed an item that's covered in black bin liners. And on the top of the bin liners, almost altar-like, they see a hacksaw and a number of kitchen knives. It is, without doubt, a very significant find. A full search and forensic team had already been assembled, ready, and they now took the place of the officers that initially entered the flat, and it was treated as a crime scene.
So it feels like Hardy was going through this process and worshipping his previous crime. He was really savouring in the moment. It could be related to his sadistic personality and just prolonging the pleasure that he got from the killing, or it could be related to delusional ideas or beliefs.
We've got a hacksaw, we've got several knives that may have been used in the death and the dismemberment of our victims, but you still have to prove it. You can't just present that in a court of law and say, look what we found. You still have to find evidence, links between that hacksaw and those knives to the victims and to the suspect. Because what you don't want in 18 months or 2 years' time when the trial happens and whoever is standing in the dock accused of these crimes can turn around and say, yeah, it's my hacksaw, but I didn't use it. No, nothing to do with me. You have to prove it.
The body in the bag and the tools on top are the fourth piece of evidence.
We're going to have lots of photography before anything gets moved at all. And then consequently, thinking about the subsequent analysis that we'll want, each of those items needs to be packaged separately and securely so that it can't move around in its packaging, so that it can't rub off on the inside of an exhibit's bag, for example.
Meticulous handling of the evidence is crucial. There could be fingerprints, DNA, or even clothing fibers on the weapons.
The key thing is to make sure that you're not losing anything, that you're not adding anything, that it remains as far as you are possibly able to keep it in the same condition that it was when you first picked it up.
Obviously, one of the main things you have to do is find out who that person is, who the victim is. And that, of course, is going to be extremely difficult. It's the torso. There are no heads, no arms, no legs. So we have no fingerprints. We have no dental records that can be compared to missing persons.
Here we have a classic invisible victim. And these are the most difficult crimes to solve. These are people who live on the margins. These are people who necessarily don't have family chasing down and where they are, contacting the police and saying this person is missing and raising alarm bells and red flags. These are the most difficult of cases. And in this case, not only do you have an invisible victim, but you only have a part of that invisible victim. This is as difficult a case as you can get. The secret to solving it is getting the identity of the victim. As soon as that is done, then you can begin to build maps, because at some stage that victim has crossed paths with the perpetrator. As soon as you can connect those, as soon as you identify the victim, you can begin to identify and name the suspect.
As the body is examined, the pathologist finds a crucial clue to the victim's identity. The woman has breast implants, and each has a serial number that can be traced to a cosmetic surgery in Germany.
And that clinic is able to identify the victim. We now have a name for the victim.
The dead woman is Elizabeth Valad, age 29.
We now have a fast-moving, dynamic investigation. We have body parts being found and recovered. We have lower legs that were initially found. We have the lower part of a female torso. We have a female torso found in the flat also. The question is, are they all from the same victim? And what we find is they're not.
The DNA results have finally come through from the body parts found in the first bin, crime scene 1. The other body is identified as Bridget McClellan, age 34.
There's an old adage that if you find out how your victims live, you will generally find out why they died and how they died. And that's true in this case. Both our victims are known to have been sex workers, and Anthony Hardy is known to have used sex workers on a regular basis. And so that is where their life paths cross. Hardy has been out looking for women, and specifically for sex workers. He's actually preying on them.
Police have identified the victims and a likely suspect, but that's not enough. They need proof to link them together, and the most likely place to find that is in the flat.
You're in the situation, forensically, where you have to prove everything. One of the things that happened in this case was, for the first time in the United Kingdom, it was decided that we would use luminol.
Luminol is a mixture of chemicals that react with hemoglobin in blood, the protein that carries oxygen. The reaction creates light.
You can apply it to bloodstains that are essentially invisible to the naked eye. And we have to apply it in darkened conditions because it creates this luminescent glow.
Even if blood has been cleaned up, luminol will expose it. Blood patterns at the scene reveal the victims were killed in the bedroom and dragged to the bathroom, where they were dismembered.
In this case, luminol is an important part of the puzzle. So it gives us a piece of information that, in the context of other things, starts to become really powerful. Somebody's tried to clean up here. It's been concentrated into the areas around the bath, on the basin, and all those kind of areas. These individuals have suffered catastrophic blood loss in that crime scene, and someone has tried to clean it up.
Gradually, the flat gives up its secrets. A woman's torso, possible murder weapons, blood patterns proving that the victims were dismembered in the flat before being put in black bin bags. It would be the black bags that would give the police their next piece of killer evidence.
Forensic investigation of the bin bags themselves was able to show that they were all manufactured through the same process. Consequently, that information was indicative that the bags belonged to the same roll of bin bags.
What the scientists can do is look at the method of manufacturing. They come out of a long, thin nozzle. Now, the nozzle's metal, and whilst it looks smooth, microscopically it's not. When you get those bin liners and you put them under polarized light, you can actually see the manufacturing lines. And what happens is they pass from one bin liner to the other. You can actually match the lines. So you can prove a bin liner in a dustbin 200 meters away, 300 meters away, actually came from the roll that's under the sink in the kitchen. Damning evidence, conclusive evidence.
We know from the manner in which these poor victims died, the manner in which they were cut up and disposed, we know he is a psychotic individual. He is very dangerous and very damaged. We also know that in his cruelty, he has very little empathy. He's now looking like he is indeed psychopathic. He's hitting all those beats, and that means he's a very, very dangerous individual. Everybody knows that that man has to be in custody, else someone else will die.
The hacksaw and knives found in the flat have been sent for DNA analysis, and the results are starting to come back.
There are forensic connections on the knives to the victims in relation to DNA profiles. There are DNA profiles on those implements to Mr. Hardy, as well as Mr. Hardy's fingerprints, linking him to the tools, to the implements, and to the victims.
With the weapons found in Hardy's flat covered in his fingerprints and the victim's DNA, police believe they now have enough to charge him with murder. But Hardy is still on the run, and London is a big city. It's now 2 days since the partial remains of 2 women were found dumped in bags in communal bins. And police are convinced that Anthony Hardy is the killer. Another body part has been found inside his flat. Weapons laid out on top of it have DNA links to the victims. Bloodstains prove the bodies were dismembered in the flat. And a roll of bin liners found in a kitchen cupboard match the ones containing the body parts. But Hardy is in hiding somewhere in London, and he knows police are trying to track him down. So detectives start to look at his lifestyle. They need to find out where he normally spends time, who his friends are, his regular habits, Even where he shops, the simple things can be the most important.
In Hardy's flat, there were bags from the Summerfield supermarket. We know he shops there now. It's a seemingly innocuous thing that's just lying in front of your face, but it could be crucial. It could be crucial. And it's about then exploring those avenues. Do the staff know him? Do they recognise him? Are they in the situation where if they see him again, they will phone the police? Let's just make sure that everybody that is in the places where we know he goes know that we're looking for him. The pubs he drinks in. Sometimes they're not on a good relationship with the police, perhaps. Well, that's fine. We've got detectives in plain clothes we can send into those pubs. And they can float in and have a drink and float out again. But keep an eye on it. What bus routes has he taken in the past? A whole array of things are happening, and they're all come together.
At the flat, police come across a vital lead. The bathroom cupboard contains insulin, a medication that some diabetics need to take on a regular basis.
He has a medical condition, he's a diabetic, he requires medication. How much medication has he got? Speak to the doctor. How much is missing? How much might he have? Is he going to start to seek medication? Where's he going to get it from? He's going to have to go probably to a hospital, because walking in without a prescription to a normal chemist or pharmacy wouldn't do. He would have to go to a hospital.
With a potential serial killer on the loose, there are difficult decisions to be made. The easiest way to track Hardy down would be to release his photo to the press. But that strategy has its risks.
The decision to go public on a matter like this, to issue a public warning, is made only at the highest level. The key consideration is that the hunted will now know they're being hunted, and likely how and where and why they're being hunted, and giving the offender that opportunity, that tip-off, that's another huge risk. And it's part of the decision-making matrix of a senior police officer at this incredibly difficult and complex time. The risks are huge. There's a risk of vigilante activity. There's a risk of a moral panic. And there's a risk that the investigation will be swamped with irrelevant leads.
Every single one of those phone calls that are made have to be followed up. And that just means the detectives that are there have to work that much harder and that many more hours. It's as simple as that.
Police concentrate their efforts around hospitals where Hardy might collect his medication.
Mr. Hardy's need for medication meant that he actually visited a local hospital and obtained more medication.
2 days after disappearing from his flat, he's picked up on CCTV at University College Hospital. He shaved his beard. So police release a new photo to the press, which quickly gets a response. A man in a Photoshop remembers Hardy coming in to get 2 films developed. While on the run, Hardy gives a friend the receipt to collect the photos. When he takes a look at them, the friend immediately gives them to the police.
Hardy would take photos of the dead bodies and he'd arrange them in strange positions, and he would even dress them in his own hat and his own socks. And there has to be some sort of psychological processes behind that. It almost feels to me that even after death, he wants to control and dominate these dead bodies. In some of the photos that Hardy took, the victims are wearing a baseball cap, one that he was caught wearing. And it shows that there's a certain intimacy with him dressing up a dead body with his own clothes. And another one was wearing a devil's mask. And to me, this seems very bizarre. And I do wonder whether that was driven by either paranoia or some sort of delusion or a symptom of mental illness.
The photos may seem damning, but alone, they do not prove that Hardy killed the women. The police must forensically prove that Hardy took the photos. A camera is recovered from Hardy's flat.
There has to be an evidential link between that camera and those photographs. And what happened was the negatives were sent to the forensic laboratory, and microscopically, if you examine the negatives, the scientists could prove that those negatives had been inside the camera. Because when you load the film up, in order to move the film on, there are sets of cogs, wheels if you like. They leave microscopic striation marks or scratches. And it could be proved that those striation marks were made by that camera and only that camera.
It's now 4 days since Hardy went missing from his flat. Since then, he's been living on the streets and sleeping in hospital waiting rooms, places he's unlikely to be questioned, as staff assume he's just another relative. But with his image all over the media, it's not long before he's recognised.
It wasn't until he'd left that hospital that a member of staff thought about it and realised that that could be the person that they'd seen in the media and phoned the police. And what happened is the police were a little bit late. These things happen. That's just the way it is. But what it did do was we now had CCTV footage of Mr. Hardy. Recent, current CCTV footage. We now know what he's wearing, and we also now know that he still looks like the photographs that we have distributed to the media.
Hardy's a marked man, and that same day, another sighting is soon phoned in.
Very shortly after leaving the hospital, Mr. Hardy is seen by the son of an off-duty police officer. He recognises Mr. Hardy as a result of all the media that's been released. His father calls the police for backup and then moves in to make an arrest. Mr. Hardy puts up an awful fight. The off-duty police officer and the uniformed first responders that arrive are actually injured in arresting Mr. Hardy, but arrested he is and taken into custody.
The police have their man under arrest, but now the pressure is really on. They have just 4 days to charge Hardy. That's 96 hours to gather together enough evidence to prove he murdered Elizabeth Valad and Bridget McLennan, whose dismembered bodies were found in public bins in Camden, in London. Detectives have gathered a large amount of evidence. CCTV, further body parts and weapons, blood, matching bin bags, and a camera used to take photos of the victims. The police are convinced that Anthony Hardy is the murderer, and they're determined to keep him off the streets before he kills again. Detectives start questioning Anthony Hardy, but he's not cooperative.
Do you know that bin at all? No comment. Have you ever used that bin, Tolix? No comment. Have you gone to that bin at all? No comment. Ever put any rubbish in it? No comment. Or ever taken any rubbish out of it? No comment.
Mr. Hardy has the right to silence. It's enshrined in British law. He doesn't have to answer any questions that are put to him. He doesn't have to prove his innocence. The prosecution have to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in front of 12 members of his peers, a jury. So he doesn't have to prove anything. He doesn't have to answer any single question. And that's what Mr. Hardy chooses to do. Now, whether that's as a result of advice from his solicitor, or whether that's because he just doesn't want to, it's hard to know.
We know that during the police investigation, Hardy stated no comment to all the questions that he was asked, even though there was overwhelming evidence against him. And there could be a number of reasons for that. He might have a delusional confidence in the ability to beat the case. It could be that he's generally trying to not cooperate with the police. So he's obviously got a lack of remorse for the victim, but he might also lack empathy towards the authorities and just intentionally be quite obstructive. If he answers no comment, then he gets to make his own statement at a later date. So to a degree, he might be able to control the narrative.
The police have been looking into Hardy's past before he arrived in London. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and has a history of domestic abuse.
We know that in the past, Hardy has had a high level of functioning. He had a family life, he had 4 children, and he was eventually abusive, however, towards his wife. So we have to think about what that's all about. It could be that he had 2 quite different personas, and over time, his actions became increasingly more twisted, depraved, and violent. Or it could be actually the results of mental illness. When somebody has a mental illness, their baseline behavior and their attitude and presentation can change. So somebody can be relatively well stable and they can be quite lucid, but if they suffer from paranoia or grandiose ideas, it can make them either feel aggressive towards people that they know or towards strangers, or it can even fill them with this delusional confidence in their own abilities.
So Hardy had proven mental health issues. He had a background which would have provided motivation and a real avenue for the jury to see that this person was capable of these offences. But in our current judicial system, that can't be used. So the police had to rely entirely on the forensic link between the knives, the weapons, and the victims. And of course, the killer evidence was the photographs Hardy took of his victims on an old camera. That's what forensically got the case across the line.
That blue wall and the bed in the background, that, Mr. Hardy, is your flat, isn't it? No comment. That, Mr. Hardy, is the dead lady, the corpse of which we found in your bedroom, Mr. Hardy. No comment. Do you recognise this as your bedroom? No comment. Okay. Let's look at this one then. It's the same lady. What have we got on that lady's head, Mr. Hardy? What can you see? No comment. We can see a baseball cap, your baseball cap, the one that you were wearing when you were arrested.
Those photographs were looked at by a pathologist. He came to the opinion, as a result of the positions that the victims were in, that they were dead when those photographs were taken.
Despite no confession, the police believe they have more than enough evidence to take Hardy to trial. On the 25th of November 2003, Hardy is scheduled to appear at the Old Bailey, charged with the murder of Elizabeth Valad and Bridget McLennan. The families of the victims have gathered. Vital witnesses are on hand, and it's predicted to be a long trial.
It's going to be several months for the trial. Witnesses are given an order in which they will appear, and everybody is ready for the trial to start.
Despite refusing to engage with police in the interviews, on the first day of court, Hardy surprises everyone, including his own legal team. He takes to the stand and admits to his crimes.
There will be no trial. Witnesses will not be called. It will not be weeks and weeks and weeks of testimony that will be challenged. The prosecution will read out the facts, and that will be it. Mr. Hardy will be sentenced, and that is the end of the matter.
So the surprising thing in all of this is that Hardy admits the guilt to 2 murders. It's extraordinary. You know, one expected a long trial, arduous for the families and difficulties for the families of the victims, but in this case he pleads guilty. And you wondered why. This is a man who is performing this. He wants you to know he's committed these crimes. Lest you be in any doubt, these are his responsibility. This is his claim. He's proud. It's a boast.
Then Hardy shocks the court with one more confession.
And then he admits to the murder of a 3rd victim, the woman who was found in his flat a year or so earlier, which the coroner had excused and initially had thought was indeed an accidental death. So you're asking, he's now admitting to 3 murders. He's not admitting to 3 murders, he's boasting of 3 murders. This is a psychopath in full performance mode. He wants you to know that he did this. He wants you to know that he's famous and infamous, and he doesn't want you to forget it.
You must remember that these are horrific offences. And the 3 women that died are not the only victims. There are families, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, grandparents. They're also victims. And probably the only thing that Mr. Hardy did that was decent was actually to plead guilty, because that has saved those other victims, the families, relatives, friends of those poor victims, from actually having to hear the evidence that was going to be adduced, and saved them from the horror that they would undoubtedly hear.
Because the victims were dismembered, it's been impossible to say exactly how they died. And this is something the judge refers to.
In summing up, the judge, Mr. Justice Keith, didn't mince his words. And he said the following to Hardy. Only you know for sure how your victims met their deaths, but the unspeakable indignities to which you subjected the bodies of your victims in order to satisfy your depraved and perverted needs are in no doubt. That is a damning verdict from an experienced judge witnessing a psychopath performing his guilty pleas. And clearly, that perpetrator was never going to see the outside of jail again.
Hardy is convicted of 3 murders and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He died in Franklin High Security Prison in 2020 from COVID. But is this the end of the story?
Mr. Hardy pleading guilty is not the end of the investigation. Has Mr. Hardy done this before? If so, where and when? The investigation was ongoing to try and trace other potential victims. In Mr. Hardy's flat, there were contact magazines, and Mr. Hardy was a prolific writer to some of these people and received replies. Every single one of those had to be traced to ensure that they were safe.
Hardy was 53 when he committed these murders in Camden. I think it would be highly unusual for somebody to commit such a level of violence so late in their life for the first time. I think it's very probable that there have been previous instances of violence. So I think he's gradually developed a taste towards violence, and he's become desensitized to it over time.
There were items in the flat that were found that were female items, and certainly on a pair of shoes, a DNA profile was found that is not on the National DNA database. But that shoe was a female shoe. Why would Mr. Hardy keep a female shoe? Trophy is the word that comes to mind, perhaps. He committed offences that don't just start. There is an escalation, generally, of people that do these types of things. I've been asked before, do I think he did it before? And my answer to that is, yes, I do believe he did. I do believe he did. Knowing and proving, however, are 2 different things.
Hardy created his own killer evidence. After murdering his victims, he took photographs, dressing them first in items of his own clothing. But it was meticulous police work, the detailed attention to forensics, that finally brought this serial killer to justice for the murder of Elizabeth Valid, Bridget McLennan, and Sally Rose White, and ended his horrific crimes.